Hello, today we're going to talk about Anchor 8 ecology. When we look at the term ecology ends in OGY, which means study of. And ecology is the study of the interactions between organisms that are living and non-living components of their environment. When we look at the levels of organization, we start with the largest biosphere, part of the earth, and we move down to ecosystem. Ecosystem is both the organisms that are living and non-living. Example would be a pond. And then we get smaller into a community, which would be all the organisms in an area that are living, like all the fish, plants, insects, bacteria in the pond. And then we go even smaller to population. A population is all members of a single species, like all the guppies in the pond. And finally, we get to the smallest level of organization is one guppy. You can go backwards to say one guppy, an organism, lives in a population of guppies in a pond. The population of guppies is in a community in the pond. The community of the pond makes up the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is found on the earth. And here's a picture just breaking it down from the highest level to the smallest level. So when we look at some ecology definitions and terms, we need to define habitat, a place where an organism lives. And we look at the two factors, biotic, you see the word bio in it. Bio means life. A in front of the word biotic means non-living. So examples of abiotic factors include temperature, humidity, pH, oxygen, sunlight, etc. We need to look at the term niche. The niche is also where an organism lives in its habitat. What an organism eats is involved with its niche. The role an organism plays in the ecosystem is also involved with its niche. When we look at the word niche, it has two different meanings. There's the fundamental niche, which means the potential area that it can occupy. And there's the realized niche, is the actual area that it occupies. So if we look at this picture here, the fundamental niche of the birds is the entire tree. But if we look specifically, the Cape May warbler, its actual or realized niche is in the top of the tree. When we look at the bay-breasted warbler, its realized niche is this peach area. And when we look at the yellow-rumped warbler, its realized niche is the bottom of the tree. So even though it has the fundamental niche where it could occupy any place, its realized niche is what it actually occupies. When we look at populations, how are populations examined? Populations are examined by the size, the number of individuals, the density, which is the number of individuals in an area, that's how it differentiates between size, and dispersion, how a population is spread out. If we look at this, next slide, we can see that it is dispersed. Populations are dispersed in three different ways. It could be random, where you don't really have a rhyme or reason. It could be clumped, and it can be evenly spaced out. Here's the random, where there aren't any distinct areas, distinct measurements. The dots are random. Like when you think of wildflowers, they are randomly spaced. There aren't an equal distance between them. Whereas even, you can see in the picture here, they're even. And clumped, like neighborhoods, they are clumped together. How do populations change? Well, if you think of West Allegheny, how would West Allegheny's population change? It would be the birth rate. How many people are born into West Allegheny School District? How many people die? The number of deaths. There's immigration with an I, which means number of individuals moving into an area. So immigration with an I, into with an I. Emigration begins with an E. That's the number of individuals moving out, or what we say, exiting an area. So emigration, moving out, you're exiting the area. And then we have the growth rate is determined by the birth rate minus the death rate. The next slide, there are two types of population growth models. When we look at, this is a growth model, so it's a model dealing with population. In this particular one, it's called exponential, and we say it has a J shape because it starts off and the population exceeds and grows like very quickly. So the population grows slowly at first, and then it reproduces faster, causing large amounts of growth. This can occur briefly and under certain conditions. The reason it occurs under certain conditions is because the exponential does not take into effect limiting factors. It doesn't take into factors that would limit the growth, such as food being available, shelter being available, water being available, and space being available. The second type of growth, population growth model, is what we call logistic. And if you look at it, you can see that it starts off slow. There is some growth, and it takes off, and then it levels off. When we talk about this, it grows rapidly at first, and then levels off is the key hint that you need to look at. Because when it levels off, this area over here, where it is leveling off, this is referred to as the carrying capacity, the maximum number that it can sustain. So right here, this is the maximum level that the environment can sustain. If it goes above, it's not going to live very long because there won't be a lot of food or water or shelter available to the population. So we say the logistic has an S shape, whereas the exponential has the J shape. When we look at communities, I told you there are 5 ways that communities can interact. And this was, if you can remember from class, we talked about C, C, M, P, P. When we talked about CCMPP, where the 1P is predation, when one species preys upon the other. When we look at the next slide, parasitism is the other P, CCMPP, parasitism, where it parasites, where it feeds off of another. It could be an ectoparasite, where it lives on our skin, like mosquitoes and like ticks, or it can be endoparasites, where it lives on the inside of the body, like a tapeworm. One of the C's, CCMPP, competition, where the niches overlap. And when you have a niche overlap, you're going to compete. Maybe you're going to compete for sunlight, like the trees are, or maybe you're going to compete for reproductive success, like in the bottom, competing, the stronger male wins so that he can mate with the female. M, CCMPP, is mutualism, where both species benefit. We see there is Nemo, the clownfish, and the sea anemone. They both benefit by living together. And you also see the insect, the bee, pollinating the flower, and the flower feeding the bee. So it is a mutualistic symbiosis. The other C is commensalism, where one species benefits and the other is unaffected. But birds in this area are benefiting, because as the cows are stomping around eating, there are lots of insects around them, and the birds will eat the insects around that area. Or the barnacles on the whales. The whales aren't affected. They could care less if the barnacles are there. The barnacles are the ones that benefit. So we have, to review, C, C, M, P, P, where it stands for commensalism, competition, mutualism, predation, and parasitism. If we look then to the next slide, we're going to talk about succession. Succession is over time. Orderly change is a series of orderly changes. That's what succession is. And there are two types of succession. The two types of succession being primary succession. I told you to remember no soil. So where there has been no soil is a result of primary succession. You see there's no soil here, and you see there's no soil here. So primary succession would be where there has been no soil. Secondary succession occurs where there has been soil, and we'll get to that in a moment. Pioneer species, if you see the word pioneer species, they get into an area and they are the pioneers, they're the first to establish themselves after a major disruption. Weeds are an example of the pioneer species. Dandelions, you have goldenrod, you have different weeds that come into an area. This picture here just shows succession, a series of changes over time. As I mentioned earlier, there is secondary succession, and I said to remember secondary, S, this is where soil has been. This would be an example of a tornado that goes by and it destroys, or maybe there's been a forest fire, or maybe there has been a tsunami, or there has been some kind of disaster that would have disrupted the area where there was growth before. Ecosystems basically show a flow of energy. We have to know producers produce their own food. Producers begin with a P. They go through photosynthesis. P. Plants are an example of producers, and they begin with a P also. So you can think of producers like P cubed. Plants, photosynthesis, producers. The next slide is consumers. Consumers, they eat other organisms. So if they're not producers, they're consumers. Examples of producers or consumers are herbivores. If you look and you see the word herb, they eat the producers. They eat plants, herbs. They eat plants. If you look at carnivores, carnivores eat herbivores or other consumers. Omnivores eat both, and detritivores are the scavengers like bacteria, vultures that feed off of others. This shows you an energy pyramid where energy flows up. The greatest amount of energy is in the base, and as energy goes up, you lose energy. A food chain is a chain where it goes one after the other. The flow of energy is going in this direction, towards clockwise, and counterclockwise is what it eats. And here's a food web. A food web shows a flow of energy, and it shows many chains. And this is a very quick, brief explanation of Ecology Anchor 8.